Let's get started. We're going to focus on the first three Mishnayot of the chapter, which are the main Mishnayot that discuss the main topic of the chapter and ostensibly the main topic of the Massekhet as a whole, the reading of the Megillah. What aspect of the reading of the Megillah is treated in these three Mishnayot?
When it should be read, and depending upon where.
Right. Okay. So it's where and when. Okay. Different times for reading the Megillah in different kinds of communities. Okay. Now, on what is this based? Where did the Mishnah get the idea that there really are different kinds of communities for reading the Megillah? Okay, this is a review of something we touched on last time.
For the Megillah itself. Is that what you mean?
Right, yes.
From chapter 9, mostly.
In verse 15, we have the people of Shoshan celebrating on the 15th, and then we have the people of all of the other Medinot celebrating on the 14th, and we have Mordecai's letter that talks about the 14th and the 15th, so we've got some kind of difference or both days being significant coming out of the Tanakh.
Right, very good. And let's add one other detail that we saw last time, and that is that there was one of the stages of the development of the festival, the second stage, the one after the first year, when different communities spontaneously decided on their own to celebrate, that the Megillah just tells us that the unwalled cities celebrated on the 14th, indicating to us that for some unexplained reason, there are walled and unwalled cities, and that only in the unwalled cities did they celebrate on the 14th, and we're not told what the walled cities did at that time. That's like a tantalizing hint that the Megillah tosses to us, and as we'll see, the Mishnah really picks up on that theme. Okay, but one of the things the Mishnah does is, well, how many kinds of communities are there in the Mishnah?
Three,
not two, but three. And on how many days could the Megillah be read in the Mishnah?
5?
4 or 5, yeah.
That's right.
5. The 11th
5
and the 15th.
days. Okay, so we've all experienced inflation in the field of economics. And here we have inflation in the field of Mishnah, right? The Megillah talks about 2 places. Now we have 3. It talks about two kinds of 2 different dates on which we can read, and all of a sudden we have 5 different dates. Okay, so let's try to get something of a handle on how that works. Okay, here, let's open up the text. Here I have the text here on PowerPoint presentation. Here we go. Share.
Great.
Okay, let's move this down here. Okay, good. Here we go. Okay, so the very first line of the chapter, Megillah nikret b'achadasar, b'shnemasar, b'shloshasar, b'arba'asar, b'chamishaasar. Okay, so we have 5 dates, the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, or 15th of Adar, lo pachot v'lo yoter. Not earlier. Pachot literally means less. Here it means earlier. V'lo yoter, and not later. And then the Mishnah details for us where it's read on which of these dates. Krachin amukafin choma mimot Yoshua bin Nun, korin b'chamisha asar. Okay, cities that were surrounded by a wall at the time of the conquest of Eretz Israel by Yoshua bin Nun. Okay, they read on the 15th. Kfarim by Arot Gdolot, the other two kinds of communities, Korin bar Ba'asar, Elash Kfarim Makdimim Liyom HaKnisa. They read on the 14th, but the Kfarim, the villages, okay, precede it, move it up earlier to the day of ingathering. Okay, so if we look at this carefully, I think we can find a bit of a solution or something of an explanation as to how the 2 dates morphed into 5. How did that happen?
That they had to accommodate the days of gathering, and that those must not have always fallen on the dates that were provided.
Okay, and for whom did they have to accommodate those dates?
Villages and large town villages.
Just villages.
The villages, okay? The smallest of the 3 kinds of communities, they're the ones, okay, for whom the sages felt they needed to provide them with the opportunity to read the Megillah on the day of gathering. Okay, so actually, even the Kfarim, their default day is the 14th. Okay, Korin bar Ba'asar, their default day is the 14th. But if the 14th doesn't happen to coincide with the day of gathering, so then the Kfarim move it up to an earlier time, to the closest day of gathering that precedes it. Okay, in a way, this reminds me of an American festival coming right up, right? Thanksgiving, right? Always on a Thursday. Okay, Labor Day is always on a Monday, right? So, okay, so the Mishnah had that idea before the Americans came on the scene. Okay, so the Megillah reading for the Kfarim will always be either on a Monday or on a Thursday. Okay, so we'll start to talk in a bit about what these different kinds of communities are and why we differentiate among them. But maybe before doing that, let's say a word about these 2 days, Monday and Thursday. What's special about those 2 days?
Market days, court days,
and Torah reading days.
That's right. Okay, we know the uniqueness of these days from other sources. We know that there were market days. We know that there were court days. That actually appears in Tractate Ketubot. That's the reason why a woman who has not been previously married, okay, will be their marriage is always made on a Wednesday, because they want to have it immediately before a court day, just in case there's a problem, so they can go right away to the court to sort out what the problem is. Okay, so the opening of Massekhet Ketubot teaches us that Mondays and Thursdays were court days. We know that these are days of Torah reading. Anything else about these days? Masechet Ta'anit, which is the Masechet that's immediately adjacent to Masechet Megillah, tells us that fast days, public fast days, were always declared on Mondays or Thursdays. Okay, not the historical fast days that we observe, but let's say a fast day for lack of rain. Okay, so those would always be scheduled for a Monday for a Monday or a Thursday. Why, in fact, were these days singled out for all of these things? Any thoughts?
Going for history, theology. I'm not quite sure where to go.
Whatever you can come up with.
I mean, basic logistic wise, they're equidistant from Shabbat. So if Shabbat is also a key day, this kind of neatly chunks up the week as evenly as you can chunk 7.
Okay.
Don't go 3 days without reading, like 3 days without water. There's that midrash.
That's right. That's also the case. Actually, I think there's also at least for some of these points, there can be an interesting reason that's rooted in the creation account. Because if you look at the creation account, the 2nd and 5th days of creation correspond to one another. 2nd day is the day when heaven and earth were separated, and the 5th day is the day when creatures of the sky, namely birds, and creatures of the waters, the oceans, okay, namely fish, were created. Okay, so this separation between heaven and earth, I think, might be relevant. But I think the reason that's most applicable here in Massekhet Megillah does have to do with what Madeline suggested, which is the distance from Shabbat. Because if you look actually at the list of the different dates on which Purim can fall, okay, and the Mishnah, when it lists them in order, starting from if the 14th day is on a Monday, if the 14th day is on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. Okay, so Monday is singled out because it is a Yom HaKnisa. And therefore, on that day, Kfarim Bayarot Gdolot, Korin Bo Bayom. On that day, the villages and the large cities read on the same day. And only the Mukafot Choma, the walled cities, read it on the following day. Then we group together the 3rd and the 4th day of the week, right? Tuesday and Wednesday, because those are both non-Yom Knisa. And therefore, you have a division between the Kfarim and the Ayarot. The Kfarim, Maktimim Liyom HaKnisa, they move it back to Monday. Ayarot Gdolot Korin Bo Bayom. Then we move to Thursday, right? Thursday, the Kfarim and Ayarot Gdolot, again, are reading together because it's a Yom HaKnisa. Only the Mukafot read it the following day on Friday. But now look what happens in the Mishnah. The Mishnah does something quite remarkable in my eyes, right? Subtle, but in my mind, quite remarkable. Chaliot Erev Shabbat. Instead of, what would we have expected? Chaliot
Yom Shishi.
Yom Shishi. Up till now, it's been Sheni, Shlishi, Revi'i, Chamishi. We don't have Chaliot Yom Shishi. Chaliot Erev Shabbat. So, Kfarim Maktimim Liyom Knisa. Okay. I mean, even today, we'll often refer to Yom Shishi as Erev Shabbat. Chaliot b'Shabbat makes perfect sense. But look what happens on the final day of the list. Chaliot Achara Shabbat. Does anybody call Sunday Achara Shabbat? Proper name is Yom Rishon. But what actually has the Mishnah done? What has it done to the week? How is the week presented here in the Mishnah?
Oh, it's centered around Shabbat.
That's right. Okay, we actually have a half of the week that centers on Shabbat. Friday, Shabbat, Sunday, that's one section of the week. And then we have another section of the week, the 4 days, the 4 days that open with Monday and close on Thursday. Okay, so actually what the Mishnah has done, okay, there is, I'd call it a work week. The work week of the Mishnah is from Monday to Thursday. Okay, I mean, very, very modern concept, right? We have work weeks that are shrinking, right? So you have the work week and then you have the weekend. Okay, so Mishnah has that as well. Okay, it has the work week of Monday through Thursday. So that work week opens and closes with a Yom Knisah. That's how you open and close the week. Okay, you kick off your work week with a day of gathering, and you close your work week with a day of gathering. And then after you've closed the work week, okay, then you enter weekend mode. And weekend mode divides into before Shabbat, Shabbat, and after Shabbat. That's how the week is structured. Okay, so I think the Mishnah gives us something of a sense of how that works, and yes, I think it very much shows you the centrality of Shabbat. Our Shabbat gives shape to the entire week, and I think it also raises an interesting question as to why the Mishnah is so concerned about the relationship between reading the Megillah and Shabbat. And what actually is the relationship between reading the Megillah and Shabbat?
Don't read the Megillah on Shabbat.
We don't. Why not?
Because of carrying.
Okay, that's the standard reason given in the Gemara, right?
Right.
The Gemara relates it to another two things that we don't do on Shabbat.
Shofar blowing.
We don't blow the shofar on Shabbat, and
lulav and esrog.
And we don't take the lulav on Shabbat, right? So in the in the third generation of Babylonian Amoraim, the Amora Rabbah, okay, assembled these three halachot, and he put them all together under one heading. The heading was that anything that might involve the danger of a person carrying out into a public domain on Shabbat, so the sages said, rather than take that risk, we will abolish that mitzvah on Shabbat. Okay, that's the explanation of Rabbah. Okay, but actually, if you look, for example, in the Yerushalmi has different reasons for lulav and for shofar, and it's very likely that that was not the original reason. Okay, the original reason seems to have to do with the rabbis not wanting to have certain kinds of celebration clashing with Shabbat. The rabbis felt that certain kinds of celebration have to have their own space, as it were, okay? To have their own time and not have it somehow conflicting with Shabbat. But I think it's interesting regarding the Megillah that the celebration of Purim is called in the Megillah a celebration of resting. Okay, remember that? They went to battle on the 13th and in Shushan again on the 14th. And then on the 14th and the 15th, they rested. So in a certain sense, Purim is like a kind of rabbinically legislated Shabbat. Okay, and I think that the fact that we're not supposed to read the Megillah on Shabbat, and obviously also not celebrate Purim on Shabbat, although the Mishnah has very little to say about the actual celebration. But as we know, that's the halacha as well. I think very likely has to do with the way that they perceived the Megillah reading and the celebration of Purim as being a different kind of resting. Shabbat has its kind of resting, its mode of resting, and Purim and Megillah reading, okay, are creating a different mode, okay, a different mode of, let's call it maybe not resting, but relaxing, settling down, okay. So, so I mean, I'm just throwing this out as a thought. The Mishnah doesn't really develop this, and I'd like to focus on things that we can really read out of the Mishnah, find textual hints of in the Mishnah. Okay, but I just wanted to throw that idea out there, and you can reflect upon it. If you have any insights you'd like to share, please feel welcome to share them with me or with the group. Okay, so that's in terms of how the week is structured and how the times are defined. Okay, one more technical question before we move on to some of the issues that the Mishnah raises. But what exactly does it mean, Yom HaKnisa? Who's gathering and where?
Doesn't it just mean that they entered to the larger cities, or whatever's closest, the larger, whatever larger entity is nearby?
Okay, Knisa can mean enter. Here, I think it's likelier to mean to gather.
Okay.
Right? Like, where have we encountered this root, kaf nun samech, meaning to gather?
In the Megillah.
Yeah.
Lech kenoset kol haYehudim. I mean.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Vatomer Esther lashiv al Mordechai lech kenoset kol haYehudim hanimtzeim b'Shushan. Okay. So an important, a very crucial point point in the narrative of the Megillah is when Esther tells Mordechai, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go for it. I'll go into the king, but before I go into the king, you have to gather all the Jews who are found in Shushan and fast for me for 3 days and nights. I too will fast, and that will be hopefully the way of influencing a positive outcome when I come to enter the king. But actually, this root knos is very central for another reason. Okay? If you think about the whole dynamic of the narrative of the Megillah, how are the Jewish people described at the beginning? Earlier on in the Megillah, what characterizes the Jews as a people?
And if you feel like, I mean, I don't even know what the project budget is, but if you feel like we ought to be doing this and your answers are satisfactorily answered.
A couple of times we hear that they're scattered throughout the Medinot of the king. That's maybe an element.
Okay, good. Okay, let's. Right. Okay. When Haman is speaking to Achashverosh and asking him to approve the murder of the Jewish people, Okay, that's how he describes them. Yeshno am echad, mifuzar u'miforad ben ha'amim. Okay, a scattered and separated nation. Okay, and what is Esther in fact doing? Okay, what is she in effect doing in this pasuk that we have posted here?
She's bringing them together.
She's bringing them together. Later on in the Megillah, we'll read that when when they battle, okay, it's described as nikhalu v'amod al nafsham. Okay, and that word nikhalu is repeated several times. Okay, to congregate. Okay, so the assembly, here it's an assembly, later on it's a congregating. Okay, there's a very central part of what the Megillah is, how a scattered nation all come together. They come together in order to deal with the threat, and then ultimately at the end of the Megillah, they come together in order to celebrate. Right, so I think the fact that the Mishnah has taken this term knisa, which as I say, I think in this case means, means assembly. Okay, I think that's a very carefully chosen term. Okay, what the Kfarim are doing on Mondays and Thursdays is they are assembling. Okay, but as Sherry suggested, the place that they're assembling is probably in the cities, right? Okay, how are cities defined? Okay, remember from the Mishnah, cities are defined?
The 10 idle men?
Yeah. Okay, kol sheyesh ba'asara batlanim. In contemporary Hebrew, batlanim is not a very honorific term, right? It's a batlan. Right? Okay, could be translated as a ne'er-do-well, someone who has very little productive to do with his time. Okay, but here, okay, the asara batlanim, okay, are what we might call today professional Jews, right? They're people who spend their time in the Beit Knesset, in the Beit Midrash. They spend their time serving the community, and particularly serving the community in matters of ritual, worship, Torah study, right? So any city which has at least 10 such individuals, that measures as a big city. Any city that doesn't have such individuals, that's a village. Now, why would that be the criterion for what counts as a city and what counts as a village? Okay, it's not a social criterion, it's not an economic criterion, political, not how the municipality is constructed, or, how people earn their living or interact, in all kinds of social frameworks. Why would this be the definition?
Well, perhaps, sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
That they're the seeds of some coming together, draw everybody together. They could be the nucleus because they're already doing what we're all going to be doing.
Right. Okay. Now, I don't know how many of you have had the experience of coming for any protracted period of time to a daily minyan. Okay, but one of the big challenges in a small community, and I live in a community, Tekoa, which Baruch Hashem today has grown. We don't have trouble in the morning getting a minyan. For many years we did. Okay, and one of the things that guarantees having a minyan, if you've got your 10 batlanim in town, so you've got a guaranteed minyan, then you can, then you can build on that. Okay, you don't have your 10 batlanim, so it's touch and go on any given day whether you're going to get a minyan, right? So that really, from the standpoint of communal worship, okay, there's a huge difference, right? And so the Kfarim cannot be presumed to be able to get together a minyan in order to read the Megillah. And that, by the way, is an interesting point in its own right. Do you actually need a minyan to read the Megillah?
No, you don't.
You need it. Can you read the Megillah without a minyan?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can
Yeah,
read the
yeah.
Megillah without a minyan. Okay, but from the Mishnah, it sounds like the default for reading the Megillah is to have a communal reading. Okay, that seems to be the mandated way of reading the Megillah. And in fact, in the Gemara, there's a dispute whether to what extent this is mandated to have a to have a community. There is an opinion in the Gemara that actually requires a minyan, and the other opinion is just that it's strongly recommended. Okay, but from the Mishnah, you definitely get the sense that this is constructed as a communal activity, even if, at the end of the day, lacking a minyan, the individual will be able to read the Megillah. Okay, so you have your cities where you have a guaranteed minyan, and they can always learn the Megillah on the right day, which is the 14th. Then you have your kfarim, your villages, which don't have a guaranteed minyan, and so what they have to do is read the Megillah on a day when they do have a guaranteed minyan, namely on Monday or Thursday, when they are all congregating in the city, so they can all get together. And it's interesting. It might sound like they would actually get together in the city to read on the 11th, 12th, or 13th. That's not necessarily accurate halachically, but from the Mishnah, one could definitely get that impression. And it could be that on days when they're congregating in the city, maybe they all used to travel together, so they'd get together early in the morning on that day so they could go together to the city. Whatever the reason is, in a village where they don't have a guaranteed minyan, so they're allowed to move it up to an earlier date. Okay, what I'd like to focus on now, is to go back to the definition of walled cities. There's something very, very puzzling about the way the Mishnah defines the walled cities, namely,
Imo Yehoshua bin Nun.
Yeah.
Imot Yoshua bin Nun. How did Yoshua bin Nun horn in on the action here?
He tore them down.
He tore down a wall, okay. Okay, so maybe we're building them back up for him. Okay. Yes, any other thoughts?
Well, I think also, if the Megillat Esther was written in the diaspora, which is my understanding that it was, perhaps by the time of the Mishnah, they wanted to focus the story back in Israel. So they wanted to kind of bring back the focus of it. And they didn't want it to be a diaspora text.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, that's an excellent idea. Before getting to it, let's just look at the Tosefta. Okay, the Tosefta is a collection of Baraitot, external Mishnayot, meaning materials composed at the time of the Mishnah that were not selected for inclusion in the Mishnah. And many of these materials were collected a generation or two after the redaction of the Mishnah and arranged pretty much in the order of the Mishnah, with some differences, as we'll see in our next class. Okay, next class, Bezrat Hashem, next week, we'll see a very interesting example of where the Tosefta and the Mishnah, deal with similar material but in different ways. Okay, but here the Tosefta is playing a more classic role, just expanding the Mishnah. Okay, and the Mishnah, the Tosefta here, brings a couple of opinions that were left out of the Mishnah. Okay, so the Tosefta quotes Krachim Amukafim Choma Mimot Yoshua bin Nun Korin B'Chamisha. That's just like the Mishnah. But then the Tosefta brings the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha, who says Mimota Chashverosh. Okay, he says that the walled cities are defined by
whether the walls were standing in the days of Ahasuerus, in the days that the story of Esther took place, which is a more intuitive timeline for the story itself.
Absolutely. So Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha actually makes a lot more sense. There's actually a third opinion in the Tosefta, which I didn't bring here, which says that walled cities are defined, believe it or not, by whether it has a wall now. Okay, that actually perhaps makes the most sense of all, right? Okay, a walled city means a walled city. Okay, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says no, doesn't have to have a wall now, but it does have to have had a wall at the time when the Megillah reading was instituted. But our Mishnah ignores those two other opinions and instead opts for this very puzzling opinion of Mimot Yoshua bin Nun. Okay, so what might be the reason? Okay, so this has been discussed at great length. We'll see Sherry's reason in just a minute. Okay, but first, wanted to bring you reason suggested by one of the premier early commentators on the Mishnah, Rabbi Avie of Bartanura, okay, who brings the reason that we'll see in a minute, but then adds an additional reason. Walfish Yoshua itchil yilachem b'Amalek tchila, uchtiv ktov zot zikaron b'sefer v'sim b'osnei Yoshua, v'chach yizkiru mimot Yoshua. Okay, remember last time already we talked about connection between Amalek and Haman. Haman, who was Agagi, who is assumed by the Midrash, and not unlikely that's what the Megillah intended to indicate as well, that Haman was a descendant of this Amalekite king. Okay, so how did the war against Amalek begin? Began with Yoshua, right? Yoshua leads the people into battle as Moshe climbs up on the mountain and raises his hands. And then, very crucially for the Bartanura, when Moshe is told to write down this event in a book, in a scroll, okay, he's also told, and place it in the ears of Yoshua. Yoshua has to hear what this book says. He started the battle. He has to hear that this battle is an ongoing battle. Okay? And that's why, says the Bartanura, okay, when we read the Megillah, which is one of the important way stations in this battle, okay, in this battle against Amalek, we want to give Yoshua, the originator of this battle, an honorable mention. So Yoshua finds his way into our commemoration of this particular victory over Amalek. Okay, so that's, I think, a very interesting insight on the part of the Bartanura, but I think the main reason is actually the one that we find here in the Yerushalmi. Yerushalmi tells us as follows. Rabbi Simon b'shem Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi chalku kavod le'eretz Yisrael shayta chareva botan hayamim v'talu ota mimot Yoshua bin Nun. Okay, he says it was very important for the sages in instituting the celebration of Purim and the reading of the Megillah, okay, to have an Eretz Yisrael angle. Okay, and as Sherry noted, this was a festival that's completely focused on events that took place, okay, in the diaspora, in the Persian diaspora. But they wanted to have this Eretz Israel angle, okay? So what they wanted to do is to say all walled cities in Eretz Israel should be able to read the Megillah on the 15th, the same way that they did in Shushan during that first year. But what will happen if you follow the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha, or the other opinion, if it has a wall now, or if it had a wall at the time of Achashverosh? What will be the result?
Basically, every city in Eretz Israel is excluded because they were all recently dewalled at that point.
That's
and
right.
Again, at the present.
That's right. And so in order to ensure that we read the Megillah in Eretz Israel, okay, in walled cities, okay, that there be walled cities in Eretz Israel, we had to say, okay, the walled cities had to be from before the destruction. Why does that bring us back to Yoshua bin Nun? Okay, so I'm going to suggest to you an intertextual explanation for now. And next week, we're going to add another intratextual explanation. Okay, the intertextual explanation is going to be based on two parallels to our Mishnah elsewhere in the 6 Sidarim of Mishnah. Okay, that's what we're going to look at in just a minute. And next week, we're going to see how our chapter of Mishnah alludes to this answer in its own intratextual way. Okay, but that will require us to learn the second half of the first chapter of Megillah, so that we'll look at next time. But for now, we'll look at the intertextual reason. Okay, so we'll open up with a Mishnah in Massekhet Arachin. Okay, Massekhet Arachin is towards the end of Seder Kodshim. People who learned Daf Yomi learned it not that long ago. Okay, and at the towards the end of Masechet Arachin, the Mishnah talks about the laws of walled cities. Now, what laws in the Torah relate to walled cities? Anybody recall? Batei Arei Choma. Okay, Batei Arei Choma are mentioned at the end of the book of Vayikra. Okay, the end of the book of Vayikra tells us what happens when a person is forced to sell real estate. Okay, it actually doesn't say forced, it just says sells real estate. But the working assumption is that people didn't normally sell real estate unless they were in pretty dire financial straits. Real estate was security. Okay, so real estate, first of all, means the main kind of real estate that the Torah is concerned with is fields, agriculture. Okay, and what happens when a person sells his field? Okay, what's the famous law? When you sell your ancestral field, what happens to it eventually?
It eventually returns to you.
It returns to you
On a set
during the
cycle.
Jubilee year, right? The Jubilee year, okay, when the 50th year comes around, no, not the 50th year from when you sold, the 50th year from the cycle counted by the Jewish people. Okay, when that 50th year rolls around, the field gets returned, and that in turn dictates the price of the field. Okay, the Torah says when you sell it, don't overcharge. Sell it remembering it's essentially like a 49-year lease, okay, or less, depending on when the Yovel, how far away the Yovel happens to be. Okay, and that's how you should sell it. Okay, so that's as far as fields are concerned. But what happens if you sell a house? Okay, so a house has different rules, and the houses that apparently are regarded as the kind of house you're attached to is the house that you have in a walled city. That's apparently the kind of house that would give you security, and that if you sell it, the Torah is interested in giving you a way of getting it back. So the law regarding a house in a Beit Ir Choma is that you're given a year during which you're allowed to redeem it. Okay, you can come during that year and say, okay, I want my house back. Here's your money back. I want my house back. That's only within a walled city. Okay, but they are a choma. And interestingly, how does the Mishnah define walled cities for the sake of this law of Batei Arei Choma? So look at the Mishnah. Elu hein Batei Arei Choma, mukafot Choma mimot Yoshua bin Nun. Why is that defined in terms of mimot Yoshua bin Nun? So the reason here can't be lachalok kavod l'Eretz Yisrael, okay, in order to show honor to Eretz Yisrael. Okay, the reason here is actually something else. A Beit Ir Choma, and this is something we'll see, we'll see more clearly in the next source we look at. Okay, a Beit an Ir Choma actually is not only a social and political definition, but it also defines a certain level of sanctity in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, and what the Mishnah is actually teaching us here is that when Eretz Yisrael was sanctified, okay, when was it sanctified? What granted Eretz Yisrael sanctity initially? Okay, I'll tell you an idea that was one of Rabbi Soloveitchik's favorite ideas, and that is that sanctity almost always involves human activity. Sanctity means a connection to God, but the one who defines the connection to God in almost all cases is man. And Rabbi Soloveitchik famously took even those cases where it would appear that God has sanctified without man, such as Shabbat, and said, yes, God sanctified the Shabbat, but man has to sanctify it as well. It's fully sanctified only when man confers upon it his own sanctity. Okay? And Eretz Yisrael is a wonderful example of how sanctity is conferred by man. God promised the land of Israel to the patriarchs, but it did not yet have sanctity. When did it develop sanctity? When the descendants of those patriarchs entered the land and took possession of it, okay, when they conquered the land and took possession of it, that's when it gained its sanctity. And therefore, who is actually responsible for sanctifying the land of Israel?
Joshua.
Yoshua bin Nun.
Wow,
And when
that's beautiful.
he sanctified the land of Israel, he at the very same time also sanctified the walled cities. They developed at that point, when the land became sanctified, they attained their exalted status as walled cities, and that status never departs. And so even though the Mishnah is referring to a later time, it's referring to Second Temple times, after the people were exiled, after these cities were destroyed, when only a fraction of the people returned to the land, when they didn't have full sovereignty. Nevertheless, the sanctity of the walled city was not a new status that was conferred upon these cities at the time of Shivat Zion, at the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, the status of these walled cities was retained from the first Commonwealth, from Beit Rishon, from the conquest of Yoshua bin Nun. That's what the Mishnah teaches us, Massekhet Arachim. Okay? Now, there's something interesting here that we'll just note, okay, and we'll come back to next time. Okay, what are the walled cities that are listed in the Mishnah? So we have 7 cities listed, mostly in the Galil and in the Golan. Okay, Katzra, Yishana Shel Tziporim, Chakra Shel Gush Chalav, Yodfat HaYishana. Okay, those are all in the Galil. Gamla, Gedud, Chadid, Ono. And what rounds out the list, interestingly, is Yerushalayim. Okay, just jot that down for future reference. We'll be coming back to it. Okay, that Yerushalayim is like the final walled city listed in this Mishnah. Okay, so this is one intertext that I think is interesting to think about in relation to Megillah reading. Let's look at another. Mishnah in the first chapter of Kelim. Kelim is a tractate devoted to purity and impurity of vessels. The first introductory chapter is a kind of general introduction to laws of impurity and interrelating them with levels of sanctity. So you have levels of impurity and levels of sanctity. And the levels of sanctity are defined here in terms of Eretz Yisrael. Eser Kedushotein, there are 10 levels of Kedusha. Eretz Yisrael Mekudeshet Mikol Aratzot. Eretz Yisrael is the highest level of Kedusha. Umahi Kedushata. Okay, and its Kedusha is defined in terms of being the place from which you can bring the Omer offering, the first fruits, okay, the Shtei HaLechem offering on Shavuot, okay, which you can't do from other lands. What's the next level of Kedusha in Mishnah Zayin? Hayarot hamukafot choma mikudashot mimena. The next level of Kedusha is cities that are surrounded by a wall. Okay, remember I mentioned already back in the previous source that they also have sanctity. But we didn't yet see what their sanctity is. Okay, what is their sanctity? Shemishalchim mitocham et hamitzoraim. Okay, when the Torah says that mitzoraim have to sit outside of the camp. Okay, that's fine for when Israel are in the wilderness. They're traveling through the wilderness and they have an encampment. So the mitzorah, which is not Hansen's disease, but we won't go into that. The mitzorah is told that he has to sit outside of the camp. But in Eretz Yisrael, how do you define the camp? Well, where is he supposed to go? Out to the desert or outside of the land entirely? So here the Mishnah answers that question. The camp of Israel means walled cities. Any part of Eretz Yisrael that is not a walled city is not considered to be part of the encampment of Israel, and the mitzorah is permitted to be there. Okay, a second halakha of Ayarot Mukafot Choma, Misabevin L'tochan Meit Ad Sheyirtzu, but Yatsa En Machzirin Oto. Even though there is no law that you have to take a corpse out of the walled city as soon as possible, okay, you can leave the corpse there for a period of time if need be. Nevertheless, if you have taken the corpse out of the city, you can't bring it back. Okay, so that's another aspect of the sanctity of a walled city. Okay, so that's the second level of sanctity. What's the third level of sanctity? Lifnim min hachoma, inside the wall of Which wall are we talking about?
Is this the wall of the temple?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Not actually of the temple, but of something that in a certain sense is the outer periphery of the temple, namely the walled city of Jerusalem. The Fnimin HaChoma means inside the walled city of Jerusalem. Mikudash Mehem, that's more sanctified than the Ayarot Mukafot Choma. What is their sanctity? Shochlim Sham Kodshim Kalim. You eat there. Okay, the let's say Shlamim offerings can be eaten there. Umaser Sheni. And then the next level is Har HaBayit. Okay, the Temple Mount. That's the fourth level. Okay, now what again is interesting is the next level of Kedusha above that, the Kedusha of walled cities is the sanctity of Jerusalem. Okay, remember how Jerusalem rounded out the discussion of rounded out the discussion in chapter Malachim, right?
Mhm.
So now, okay, what does this intertextual study tell us about the walled cities in terms of Megillah reading? Why did we pick Mimot Yoshua bin Nun?
Precisely because these are sanctified spaces. To some
Okay,
extent.
and as sanctified spaces, they're defined not by what exists today. Today, let's say we're back in second temple times. Okay, we are instituting the festival of Purim, and we're saying if there's something special about walled cities, well, in Eretz Yisrael, walled cities doesn't depend on today. In other areas of halakha as well, walled cities depends on what happened at the time of the conquest of the land, and you're actually bringing Purim into the framework of First Temple, the first Commonwealth, the conquest of the land. What I think the Mishnah is actually doing is giving Purim a certain historical dimension, a certain historical depth. Okay, by saying Krachim Kafim Choma Mimot Yoshua bin Nun, I think the Megillah is saying, don't look just at what's happening now. What's happening now is a piece of the story. It's not the whole story. The whole story requires you to go back and look at what was a walled city at the time of the conquest of the land by Yoshua bin Nun. And since we've seen that walled cities also have an affinity to Jerusalem, I think that's telling us that Jerusalem is another part of the story. But how Jerusalem fits into the story, we'll have to wait until next time. Okay, so next time we'll take a look at what actually are the sages trying to teach us by fitting the Purim story into this broader historical canvas, and how do walled cities on the one hand and Jerusalem on the other hand fit into that picture. Okay, and the clue to doing that is, we saw last time already that the Mishnah has a lengthy digression where it doesn't seem to be talking at all either about Purim or about Megillah reading. Okay, and my claim is going to be that there's a subtext to that part of the chapter, and if we can unpack that subtext, then we'll get a sense of what the Mishnah is saying in the text that we examined today. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and we'll see you next week. Okay.
Thank you so much.